The Interstellar Academy of Applied Warfare was a cathedral of gleaming alloy and pulsating light, a place where young minds from across the spiral arms came to master the philosophies of combat. Its classrooms were not classrooms in the human sense, but amphitheaters of knowledge, tiered in half circles around a central dais, every surface alive with shifting holograms and adaptive displays. Here, cadets from a dozen worlds gathered to test their skills and measure themselves against traditions far older and far sharper than their own. Among the rows of scaled hides, plated carapaces, and bioluminescent skin sat a single human, posture upright, eyes intent but wary. His name was Elias Rourke, though most of his classmates simply called him the Terran. Humanity had only recently been admitted into the League, and already whispers of their perceived primitivism circulated in every corridor. Other cadets carried the elegance of technologies that shaped entire landscapes, while he carried nothing but the plain uniform issued by the Academy. The instructor entered with a rustle of membranous wings. Scholar General Irix of the Verek stood taller than most species present, his form encased not in armor but ceremonial robes threaded with metallic veins. His reputation stretched across 3 systems: philosopher of war, historian of tactics, master of disciplines that blurred science and strategy. His multifaceted eyes scanned the room, and when they fell upon Elias, their glimmer held both disdain and curiosity. "Cadets," Irix announced, his voice reverberating through a translator grid in the walls, "today you will demonstrate not only the weapons of your ancestors but the philosophy encoded within them. Technology is not merely function, it is culture crystallized. Each of you will show us how your people have faced conflict, so that we may measure the wisdom embedded in your steel, plasma, or psionics." The room stirred. A reptilian cadet unfurled a gleaming magnetic spear that crackled faintly as it drew power from a cell embedded in his armor. A crystalline student lifted what appeared to be a rod of light, its edges humming at frequencies that could shear metal. Others prepared compact graviton blades, resonance gauntlets, or even symbiotic organisms bred to channel destructive force. The air thickened with anticipation, each weapon a proclamation of cultural pride. Elias shifted slightly in his seat. His hands were empty. His ancestors had wielded swords, muskets, bows, rifles. Yes, but none of these relics had been permitted past security. The Academy had insisted on equal footing. No cadet might import advanced arms, only demonstrate or replicate them from authorized stock. But the stock contained nothing Elias could truly call his own. The Verek instructor raised one clawed appendage for silence. "Each cadet will present. You will explain the origins, the purpose, the philosophy. When I call your name, step forward. There will be no excuses." A ripple of amusement traveled the tiers. Elias could feel eyes settling on him already. The oddity, the primitive mammal who had somehow wandered into halls meant for civilizations millennia older than his. He caught fragments of muttered laughter. What will he show? A sharpened rock? Perhaps a stick set aflame? The Terran should sit this one out. Irix began at the top tier, watching each demonstration with the patience of a judge. The magnetic spear pulsed and threw arcs of metal shards into a simulated target. The crystalline rod cleaved a hollow statue in half with blinding precision. One cadet summoned a controlled burst of psionic flame that danced like liquid fire across the dais. Each act was met with respectful nods, sometimes applause, sometimes critical questions from the instructor. Elias sat in stillness, heart steady but heavy. He could not reveal his ignorance, not here, not when every gesture mattered to how humanity would be perceived in the League. He glanced at the chairs, at the polished composite of the desks, at the cards of the adaptive screens. His mind ticked quietly. Survival meant improvisation, and improvisation was something humans had never lacked. When Irix finally called his name, the chamber hushed with anticipation, sharpened by mockery. Elias rose, each step deliberate, and walked to the center of the dais. The empty space seemed vaster now, a circle of expectation that pressed down like gravity. "Human," Irix intoned, "what weapon has your kind contributed to the evolution of conflict? Show us." Elias exhaled once through his nose. He met the instructor's compound eyes, then turned his gaze to the room. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he moved toward the nearest chair, knelt, and began loosening the support struts from a frame. The sound of screws grinding out of their fittings echoed oddly in the silent chamber. A snicker broke the quiet. "He dismantles furniture now," another cadet jeered. "Is this your Terran warcraft?" More laughter followed, restrained but biting. Elias ignored it. He pulled free a length of composite, flexible enough to bend without shattering, strong enough to hold tension. His movements were not frantic but careful, hands steady, mind working in lines and arcs. He stripped a cord from the edge of a display console, testing its tensile resistance with a tug. Then he braced the strut against his knee, bent it slowly into a curve, and began affixing the cord. Eric's mandibles clicked softly, an unfamiliar sound in the chamber. His voice carried over the laughter. "Continue, human. Every act speaks a philosophy." Elias glanced at him only briefly before resuming. The bow was crude by comparison to the sleek marvels displayed earlier, but it began to take recognizable shape, an elegant curve held taut by nothing more than ingenuity and determination. For a moment the cadet's amusement faltered, replaced by a hesitant silence. "On Earth," Elias said finally, his voice calm but carrying across the amphitheater, "our ancestors faced beasts larger than themselves, enemies stronger and faster. They survived by thinking differently. When the arm was too short, they made it longer. When strength failed, they built tools that multiplied it. This," he held up the emerging weapon, still rough but unmistakable, "is a bow. It is not the most advanced tool we forged, but it is one of the first to remind us that distance could be conquered, that precision could matter more than brute strength." The silence thickened, uncertain, as he tightened the last knot. He straightened, the crude bow in his hand, and scanned the waiting faces. Some still sneered, others leaned forward with reluctant interest. Eric's eyes glimmered, reflecting something harder to name. "You will demonstrate it," the instructor said, mandibles clicking once. "And then we will decide whether this human philosophy holds merit or only amusement." Elias nodded once, wordless, as he turned toward the practice targets already set for the next round. He tested the bowstring with his thumb. It hummed faintly, alive with potential energy. The mockery from the tees had faded to a hush, the kind of silence that sharpens every movement into inevitability. And for the first time since the class had begun, the human smiled. Elias tested the curve of his improvised bow once more, listening to the faint creak of strained composite. It was crude, yes, but it had the integrity he needed. The cord thrummed beneath his fingers, tight enough to hold, but not so rigid that it would snap under the strain of a draw. Every detail mattered now, every gesture carried the weight of his people's reputation. Around him, the amphitheater's hush was stretched thin, curiosity colliding with disbelief. "Do not stall," came Eric's measured voice. "A weapon, no matter how humble, must prove its claim in use." Elias scanned the chamber, eyes settling on the practice targets lining the far wall, holo simulations of humanoid forms, their frames glowing with weak fields to register impact. Beside them stood remains of earlier demonstrations, shattered constructs split by crystalline blades, scorched husks from plasma bursts. Against those devastating exhibitions, his bow seemed almost laughable. Yet he felt no tremor of doubt. From the tiers above, the reptilian cadet who had wielded the magnetic spear let out a hissing laugh. "A stick and a string? Shall we all fetch stones and return to the caves with you, Terran?" The outburst rippled into chuckles among others, though a few remained silent, watching with cautious interest. Elias ignored the laughter. He crouched, scanning the debris from dismantled furniture, and selected a shard of alloy no longer than his forearm. It tapered to an edge already sharp from its break. He tested the balance, then trimmed its end against the floor until it narrowed enough to notch against his cord. Crude, yes, but it would fly. It only needed to fly. He rose, bow and arrow in hand, and drew in one steady motion. The cord pressed into his fingers, biting, and the composite strut flexed under the pull. His chest expanded with controlled breath, eyes narrowing on the nearest target. He released. The arrow whistled faintly across the chamber and struck with a heavy thunk, embedding into the holographic dummy's chest before clattering to the floor. The holo flickered, registering the hit. For a moment, silence pressed like a lid on the room. Then laughter erupted again, harsher this time. The crystalline cadet leaned forward, its facete skin scattering fractured light. It punctures, yes. So would a toothpick. We cleave steel, Terran. You dent holograms. Elias said nothing, only retrieved another piece of debris. He crafted it quickly into a second arrow, longer and straighter. His hands moved with the rhythm of familiarity, though no bow had touched them in years. The skill was ancestral, almost instinctive. He knocked again, pulled, and let fly. This time the arrow struck higher, punching into the target's throat. The flicker was sharper, the registration of a critical strike undeniable. The laughter faltered. The instructor tilted his head, compound eyes narrowing with intent interest. Twice, with crude ammunition, Erix observed. Yet still, these are basic impacts. Explain, human, before you continue. Elias lowered the bow slightly, turning to face the class. His voice was even, his words deliberate. On Earth, survival was often a contest of patience, adaptation, and precision. The bow was not made to overwhelm with fire or energy. It was made to turn weakness into strength. It allowed a frail human to hunt beasts larger, faster, stronger. It allowed a farmer to defend against armored foes without ever meeting them face to face. It turned distance into advantage. Some students shifted uneasily. The psionic cadet who had conjured fire earlier tilted ahead. So it is not strength, but leverage. Elias nodded once. Exactly. Leverage. A mind realizing that muscle alone is not enough. Erix's mandibles clicked faintly, his expression unreadable. Continue, human. Show us this leverage. Elias scanned the practice floor, calculating. The initial arrows had been for proof, now he needed to show purpose. He selected a longer shard, carefully notched, then bent to retrieve a fragment of paneling. With a flick of motion, he propped the panel upright against the wall near a target. His audience murmured in confusion. He stepped back, drew, and fired, not at the dummy, but at the edge of the panel. The arrow struck, ricocheted sharply, and buried itself into the dummy side, bypassing its chest shield entirely. The holo fled with an unexpected hit. A hush descended again, deeper this time. No laughter followed. Instead, eyes shifted, recalculating. The principle was undeniable. Trajectory manipulation, precision over brute force. The crystalline cadet broke the silence, though its tone lacked the same arrogance. You claim advantage from simplicity. Yet our weapons strike harder, faster, more decisively. Elias replied calmly, perhaps. But mine was built here, from scraps, in minutes. If stripped of your tools, could you still fight? Or would you be waiting, empty-handed? That landed more heavily than any arrow. The silence now was weighty, filled with recognition some wished to deny but could not. Erix stowed at last. He extended one clawed appendage toward the remaining practice dummies. With a subtle command, their programs shifted. Now they moved, ducking and weaving, shields flickering as they simulated evasive tactics. Then let us test. Accuracy under motion, with only your primitive bow. One chance. Prove your claim. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the gaze of every cadet burn into him. He fashioned his last arrow, straighter than the others, tipped carefully against a sharpened edge of the dais itself. He flexed the bowstring again, listening to its strain, feeling its will. The dummies shifted, erratic in movement, shields buzzing faintly. Elias tracked one, not with his eyes alone but with calculation born of countless ancestral hunts retold in his blood. He raised the bow, drew until the cord trembled, and waited until the target's shield fled just slightly thinner at the hip. Then he loosed. The arrow flew in a clean arc, bending under gravity, adjusting where energy bolts could not. It slipped past the flicker of the shield and embedded squarely into the moving dummy side. The holo sputtered and fell still, defeated. The amphitheater held its breath. No laughter rose this time. No scoff broke the silence. Only the sound of the arrow quivering faintly in its mark remained, a soft reminder of ingenuity's quiet bite. Erix's compound eyes fixed on Elias with renewed gravity. His voice was softer but carried farther than before. Perhaps there is more to your kind than crude stone and muscle. Perhaps imagination is its own weapon. Elias lowered his bow, expression unreadable. He said nothing, only allowed the silence to stand. And in that silence, The balance of perception shifted, not yet respect, but something sharper, unease. The instructor gestured to reset the chamber for the next trial. Yet every cadet's gaze lingered on the human longer than before, as though seeing him for the first time. The arrow still trembled faintly in the hollow dummy's side, its crude shaft shivering with the echo of impact. Elias lowered his bow, the cord slackening with a sigh, and let the silence stretch. The amphitheater no longer hummed with mockery. What remained was something heavier: consideration, suspicion, the dawning edge of respect that none of the cadets dared voice aloud. Irix broke the quiet with a measured click of his mandibles. You have demonstrated function. But a weapon without philosophy is merely a tool. Tell us, human, what truth lies inside this bow that makes it worthy of remembrance? Elias turned toward the tears. His gaze swept across scales, crystals, plated shells, and alien eyes that glimmered in shades unfamiliar to human sight. When he spoke, his voice was steady, each word deliberate. The bow represents a lesson my people never forgot. Every new weapon begins with the same principle. How do we turn what we lack into an advantage? We had no claws, no armor, no strength to rival the predators around us. But we had minds. Minds that saw a bent branch and a cord not as useless scraps, but as potential. A bow is not only wood and string. It is foresight, calculation, patience. It is distance transformed into safety, weakness transformed into precision. A murmur rose among the students. The crystalline cadet tilted its facete head, light scattering across its features. And yet it is obsolete. You admit this? Against plasma, against graviton steel, what place does such a relic hold? Elias did not look away. Obsolete in power? Perhaps. Not in principle. The same thinking that bent the branch became the thinking that split the atom. Every advance we made began with the same truth: we build because we must. And we never stop asking what else can be built. The psionic cadet who had conjured fire earlier leaned forward, eyes glimmering with restrained flame. You claim your true weapon is not the tool, but the thought that forged it. Yes, Elias answered simply. The bow is only proof of the thought. Irix's compound eyes reflected him in fractured images. A dangerous philosophy, if true, for it means no limit binds your kind. Every weakness becomes strength. Every boundary, a puzzle. He paused, mandibles twitching. Let us see how far this philosophy reaches. Words are wind, human. Show us truth against resistance. At his gesture, the practice floor shifted. The stationary dummies dissolved, replaced by advanced constructs, moving targets with flickering shields, their programming mimicking evasive combatants. They darted across the floor with unpredictable speed, shields humming in pulsing arcs of energy. A challenge designed to strain even the most sophisticated weapons. Elias studied them without haste. His bow was still rough, its frame threatening to splinter with every draw. His arrows were no more than sharpened debris. Yet his mind worked with quiet clarity. The others had demonstrated power. He would demonstrate adaptation. He chose a shard of alloy, straight and narrow, and wiped its tip against the dais, grinding until it thinned into a sharper point. Every scrape echoed through the chamber, a sound of persistence. He knocked the arrow, pulled, and tracked a darting construct. His chest rose, held, then stilled. He loosed. The arrow flew wide, glancing off a shield and skittering uselessly to the floor. A ripple of laughter threatened, but it died quickly, smothered by Irix's lifted claw. Again, the instructor commanded. Elias retrieved another shard, longer this time. He studied the constructs more carefully, eyes narrowing at the rhythm of their movement, the flicker of their shields. Every machine had a weakness, even those designed to resist. He drew once more, adjusted the angle not for where the construct was but for where it would be. The bow creaked under strain. He released. This arrow curved slightly under its own imperfect weight, dropping lower than a clean shot should have. Yet that imperfection became its strength. The shaft slipped beneath the rising edge of a shield, striking the construct at the joint of its leg. The hollow sputtered, staggered, and froze in defeat. A hiss of surprise traveled the room. The reptilian cadet's scales rippled with unease. The crystalline student leaned back, facets catching duller light. The psionic fire wielder said nothing, though her eyes narrowed as though reassessing him entirely. Eric's voice cut through the tension. You exploit flaw through calculation. An imperfect arrow becomes perfect in your hands. This is troubling. Elias lowered his bow slightly but did not release it. His words were quiet, almost conversational. War rarely gives perfect conditions. We fight with what we have. Sometimes imperfection is all that remains. Sometimes that is enough. The instructor regarded him for a long moment, mandibles still. Then he activated 3 more constructs at once. They moved faster, weaving patterns meant to confound tracking, their shields overlapping. The challenge was explicit, adaptation under pressure. Elias prepared his last 2 arrows. He weighed them both in his hands before knocking the first. Breath in. Silence. He loosed. The shot missed, shattering against the floor. The chamber stirred with anticipation of failure, whispers rising. Elias ignored them. He set the final arrow against the cord, fingers steady despite the tremor of strain in the improvised bow. His eyes followed not the target directly, but the overlapping patterns of their movement. He waited until a fraction of a second when 2 shields crossed, creating a sliver of exposed space between them. He released. The arrow curved on its imperfect flight, slipping into that sliver like a whispered secret. One construct collapsed instantly. The other 2 faltered, breaking formation. The amphitheater erupted, not in laughter but in noise, voices overlapping, disbelief colliding with recognition. Eric silenced them with a sharp crack of his claw. His gaze locked on Elias, unblinking. Imagination as weapon. Calculation as blade. This is your people's truth. Elias met his gaze without hesitation. It is not just our truth. It is our survival. The chamber settled into uneasy quiet. The cadets no longer looked at him with ridicule. Some studied him with wary respect, others with something closer to fear. In their eyes, he saw the shift, the realization that the fragile mammal among them had proven more dangerous in his ingenuity than many with weapons older than empires. Erix folded his wings slowly, his tone edged with something unfamiliar. Perhaps the League was wise to admit your kind. Or perhaps it has invited a storm it cannot yet name. The bow in Elias's hands creaked as the cord slackened. He said nothing, though a flicker of grim satisfaction crossed his face. Around him, the weight of the moment lingered, heavy with possibility. The constructs faded, the practice floor returning to neutral. Yet the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was the silence of recalibration, of cadets reassessing their place beside a human who had shown them that survival could be crafted from nothing. And in that silence, the true conflict took root, not of wood and string, but of perception, of fear, of what imagination could become when it refused to yield. The bow in Elias's hand sagged under its own rough strain, the cord fraying where it rubbed against splintered ally. The makeshift weapon had served its purpose, but it would not last. He lowered it carefully, as though laying a relic to rest. Across the amphitheater, the silence persisted, not the silence of dismissal but of shifting tides. The cadets who had mocked him now watched with wary fascination, and even those who despised him could not deny the truth carved into their memory. The human had taken nothing and turned it into power. Erix's wings rustled faintly as he descended from the instructor's perch to the central dais. The Scholar General moved with a deliberate calm, every step resonant against the metal floor. When he stopped before Elias, he towered, his compound eyes fractured into 1,000 tiny reflections of the man who stood beneath him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Erix inclined his head the smallest degree, a gesture rare and heavy with meaning. "You have demonstrated more than function," he said, his voice carrying in steady waves across the chamber. "You have shown philosophy given form. The bow is crude, yes, but it is not the weapon that unsettles me, it is the mind that crafted it. That is a sharper edge than any blade." A murmur rippled through the tiers. The reptilian cadet hissed uneasily. The crystalline student's facets dimmed, refracting light in muted tones. The psionic fire-wielder narrowed her eyes, as though studying Elias anew. Respect and fear now mixed freely in the air, indistinguishable from one another. Elias stood still, meeting Erix's gaze without pride or apology. "You asked for a weapon. I gave you one. Weapons are never just about what they destroy. They are about what they prove. This one proves that humanity does not wait for perfect tools. We make do, and we make dangerous. The instructor's mandibles twitched, not in derision, but in something closer to grim acknowledgement. A dangerous philosophy indeed. For if your kind can conjure lethality from scraps, then what storm will you raise when given true resources? He paused, letting the question linger before the cadets. That is what unsettles me most. The crystalline cadet broke the silence, its tone sharper than before. If humans can build weapons from debris, how can they ever be trusted with our arsenals? What safety exists in admitting them to the League? Another voice joined, this time from the reptilian. Perhaps they should be contained, not welcomed. A mind that sharpens anything it touches is as much a threat as an ally. The psionic student's voice cut through, quieter but clear. Or perhaps it is precisely such minds we will need when certainty fails. Adaptability is a weapon too. The debate rose like an undercurrent, cadets exchanging sharp whispers, weighing fear against respect. Elias listened without interrupting, his bow dangling loosely at his side. He did not need to argue further. The point had been made in wood, cord, and arrow. Eric's raised one claw, silencing the chamber with a gesture. His eyes lingered on Elias as he spoke. This class was meant to illuminate culture through arms. Yet what I see is not just culture, it is warning. Cadets, remember this lesson well. Never underestimate those who fight with necessity as their forge. They are not bound by what they lack. The instructor turned then, his robe shifting like living metal, and began to climb back toward his perch. As he ascended, he paused once more. His voice, softer yet carrying the weight of finality, drifted down. Human, your bow will not survive another day, but the thought behind it will endure. Guard that thought well, for others may come to fear it more than they respect it. Elias gave a single nod. He did not smile this time, nor did he lower his eyes. The bow creaked faintly in his grip, its fragile frame trembling like the echo of a storm not yet arrived. The session concluded with formal dismissal, but few cadets moved immediately. Some lingered, casting furtive glances at Elias before filing out, their expressions a tangle of unease, respect, and calculation. The crystalline student avoided his gaze altogether, while the reptilian spat a final hiss under its breath. Only the psionic cadet lingered a heartbeat longer than the rest, her flame-like aura flickering low as she met his eyes, thoughtful rather than hostile, before turning away. When Elias was alone, the vast amphitheater felt colder, its silence heavier. He examined the bow one last time. Its fibers were already unraveling, the composite bent beyond recovery. With deliberate care, he set it down on the dais, a relic of a single hour that might shape centuries. Above, in the shadows of the instructor's perch, Eric's watched quietly. His multifaceted eyes shimmered as he activated a private recording device embedded in his robes. His voice, low and deliberate, carried into the confidential channel of the League's command. Report. Today, the Terran cadet demonstrated an improvisation of primitive arms. The weapon itself holds no danger. The mind behind it does. Recommendation. Humanity must not be underestimated. Their strength is not in plasma or steel, but in imagination. Imagination is unpredictable. Imagination cannot be disarmed. He ended the transmission with a soft click, wings folding tightly against his back. His gaze lingered once more on the human figure departing the chamber. The faintest tremor of unease rippled through him, though his expression remained composed. Elias walked from the amphitheater with measured steps, neither hurried nor hesitant. The corridors beyond stretched vast and alien, alive with whispers from cadets who had already spread word of the day's lesson. Some looked away as he passed, others stared with unguarded curiosity. He carried no weapon now, nothing but the echo of what he had proved. Yet the weight of their gazes told him he carried something more enduring, a new place in their thoughts, not as a curiosity, but as a question. When he reached the exit, he paused, resting his hand briefly against the cold alloy of the wall. He thought of Earth, of ancestors crouched in forests stringing sinew to wood, of hunters who had turned frailty into survival. He thought of the path ahead, where every test would demand the same relentless invention. His lips curved, not in a smile of triumph but in acknowledgement of truth. Humanity had no choice but to make weapons out of whatever they were given. And now the galaxy knew it. Behind him, the amphitheater lights dimmed, the echoes of debate still lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Ahead lay corridors that would carry him deeper into the academy, deeper into the league's gaze, deeper into a destiny his people had not yet written, but had already begun to carve. He stepped forward, leaving behind the bow and the silence, carrying with him only the weapon that had never left his hands, his mind. The following day dawned beneath the pale glow of the Academy's artificial suns, their calibrated light spilling into corridors designed to mimic no world in particular, yet contain elements of many. Elias walked those halls with the measured pace of a man who knew he was being observed. Whispers trailed him in languages he could not understand, but tones he could easily interpret. Suspicion, fascination, unease. Some cadets turned their heads when he passed, others stared openly, their gazes calculating. Yesterday, he had been a curiosity. Today, he was something more volatile, a variable no one yet knew how to solve. At the edge of the training concourse, Irix awaited him. The Scholar General's wings folded neatly against his back, his mandibles still, but his compound eyes shimmered with restless thought. When Elias approached, the instructor motioned him wordlessly into a side chamber. The door sealed with a hiss, muting the hum of the concourse outside. Inside, the chamber was stark, its walls unadorned save for faint etchings of battle forms from a dozen species. Irix stood in silence for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Do you understand what you did yesterday?" Elias kept his posture level. "You asked for a demonstration. I gave you one." The instructor's wings flexed faintly, betraying a tension his voice did not. "You gave more than a demonstration. You shifted perception. Some now see your kind as cunning allies. Others see you as a threat cloaked in innocence. Both views are dangerous." Elias considered this without flinching. "So the League is afraid of a bow?" "No," Irix said sharply, his mandibles clicking. "They are afraid of what the bow revealed, that humans can conjure weapons out of nothing. That you cannot be disarmed, because your mind will always arm itself. Such adaptability unsettles civilizations who have grown complacent in their supremacy." The words hung between them, cold and heavy. Elias let them sink in before answering. Then perhaps they should be unsettled. The instructor studied him, one eye tilting, the others fixed. "That is a dangerous sentiment for one so new to our halls." "Or a necessary one," Elias countered. A silence passed, thick with unspoken considerations. Then Irix turned away, pacing slowly along the chamber's edge. "There is a council demonstration scheduled at week's end. Representatives from every allied system will attend. Each species will present a cadet to showcase not only skill, but promise. It is tradition. I had not considered assigning you." He turned back, gaze piercing. "Now, I am no longer certain that excluding you would be wise." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Because you want me to prove something." "Because they want to see you," Irix corrected. "They want to measure the human themselves. If you falter, they will dismiss you. If you succeed, they may fear you more. Either outcome will shape your people's place in the League." Elias absorbed this in silence. The weight of it pressed heavier than the stairs in the corridor, heavier than the bow he had carried. It was not only his reputation at stake, it was Earth's. Every hesitation, every failure, every triumph would be magnified across stars. "I'll need time," Elias said finally. "And something better than scraps of furniture." Irix's mandibles twitched, almost like a smile though his kind did not smile. "Then we will give you material. But not more than the others. You must craft with parity." The agreement was silent but firm. The week would test more than ingenuity, it would test resolve. When Elias left the chamber, the corridors felt narrower. The glances from cadets sharper. He could almost hear the whisper taking shape in their minds. The Terran will be tested. He moved through them with measured calm, but inside, thought raced. What weapon should he build? Another bow, refined and resilient? Or something else entirely, something that spoke not of repetition but of evolution? That night, in his quarters, he sat at the narrow desk provided and stared at the blank surface. The materials allotted to cadets would be standardized: alloy sheets, energy cells, composite struts, polymer cords. Nothing more, nothing less. To the others, it was limitation. To him, it was invitation. His hands itched for the work, but his mind lingered on the greater conflict. If he succeeded too well, would humanity be welcomed, or branded too dangerous to trust? If he failed, would Earth be dismissed as backward, irrelevant, unworthy of consideration? He closed his eyes, remembering the weight of the bow in his hands, the satisfaction of hearing the arrow strike true. That feeling was not about victory. It was about proving that survival could be forged from nothing. Whatever he built next had to carry that truth again, not louder, not more lethal, but sharper in meaning. Days passed in a blur of preparation. The training concourse buzzed with practice demonstrations, cadets refining their weapons under the watchful eyes of instructors. Elias worked apart, his table a storm of alloy fragments and polymer strands. Some cadets came to watch, feigning disdain but unable to hide their curiosity. Others whispered and departed quickly, as though proximity itself might brand them with suspicion. Erix visited only once, observing in silence as Elias bent alloy into unfamiliar curves, stripped polymers into threads finer than sinew, and tested tension with relentless precision. The instructor said nothing, but when he left, his wings folded tighter than before, as though concealing thought he dared not voice. On the final night, Elias sat alone with his creation. It was not a bow, though its heritage could be traced to that same principle of leverage and distance. It was something leaner, more intricate, built from the same philosophy, but sharpened by new material. He turned it in his hands, feeling the balance, the potential. The weapon was not elegant by alien standards, but it carried within it the same truth as its predecessor, humanity's refusal to yield to limitation. When the morning came, he stood before the amphitheater once more, though this time it was not filled with cadets. Delegates from the League had gathered, their forms a spectrum of biologies and technologies, their gazes cold and appraising. At the center sat the presiding counselors, their silence heavier than any jay. Erix announced each cadet in turn, their weapons displayed with polished efficiency. Energy blades sliced effortlessly through constructs. Resonance gauntlets shattered reinforced targets. Psionic fire painted the air with brilliant devastation. Each act was measured, expected, respected. Then Erix's voice carried through the hall. Elias Roque of Terror. The name echoed against the chamber's walls. Elias stepped forward, weapon in hand, the weight of countless eyes pressing upon him. He felt the silence sharpen into anticipation, the kind that waited not for spectacle but for judgment. He raised the weapon, steady, deliberate, and let the moment breathe before his first move. The whole did not know it yet, but this was no longer just a demonstration. It was the opening stroke of a greater conflict, one that would decide not whether humanity could fight, but whether the galaxy would ever feel safe standing beside them. The chamber reverberated with the sharp hum of silence that always preceded judgment. Elias stood alone on the presentation floor, his weapon cradled in his hands as though it were an extension of himself rather than an object forged of alloy and polymer. The crowd of counselors and delegates leaned forward, their many eyes, tendrils, and sensor arrays trained on the human with a focus that felt more like scrutiny than curiosity. To them, he was not merely a cadet. He was a question waiting to be answered, a risk waiting to be measured. Elias inhaled slowly, centering himself against the weight of so many expectations. He could feel the enormity of the moment pressing down, yet in the quiet of his mind he heard only Erix's words echoing. They fear you because you cannot be disarmed. They fear you because you will always find a way. That truth was a burden, but it was also a shield. If he carried it properly, it could become a weapon sharper than steel. With deliberate precision, Elias set the demonstration in motion. He drew the weapon, a refined variant of his first bow, designed with tension coils and composite string, into its ready state. The amphitheater's target array unfolded, holographic constructs flickering to life, armored drones, simulated barriers, and shifting patterns meant to stress test design. Elias did not rush. He measured angles, adjusted grip, and loosed the first bolt. The projectile struck cleanly, embedding itself deep into the reinforced target with a resonant crack. The whole remained hushed, though a ripple of murmurs stirred among a few delegates. He could sense their disbelief. Why choose a weapon so primitive when plasma cannons and molecular disruptors existed? Yet that was the point. It was not primitive. His design used materials available to all cadets, yet achieved a precision few others had considered possible. It spoke not of firepower, but of adaptability. He adjusted the weapon and fired again, this time at a moving drone. The bolt curved mid-flight, guided by a subtle adjustment in the coil tension, striking the target's vulnerable seam. Gasps, sharp and unrestrained, rippled through the chamber. Some leaned closer, others recoiled. For a moment, Elias thought he saw admiration in their alien eyes, but it was quickly swallowed by something colder, wariness. The test escalated. Barries shimmered into place, moving unpredictably. Elias pivoted, repositioned, and fired in fluid succession. His projectiles pierced where no energy blade or plasma blast could penetrate, slipping through gaps too narrow for brute force. Each strike was deliberate, a statement carved into silence. He was not here to dazzle with spectacle. He was here to prove a truth, that humans thrived not by overwhelming strength, but by turning constraint into advantage. When the final drone collapsed in sparks, Elias lowered his weapon. His breathing was steady, his stance unshaken, but inside his chest, his heart hammered like war drums. The amphitheater had grown unnervingly still. He could not tell if he had succeeded or condemned himself further. Councillor Thalen, a serpentine delegate from the Verun clade, spoke first. Her voice carried a sibilant weight that slithered across the hall. This device, crude, yet effective. You fashioned it with materials identical to those granted to your peers. Yes, Elias answered firmly. The same limitations, the same tools. Nothing more. And yet, another councillor interjected, his crystalline form glinting as he shifted. Your weapon bypassed defenses even designed energy arms could not. Tell us, human, was this ingenuity instinct or deception? Elias locked his gaze on the crystalline figure. It was necessity. On Earth, survival doesn't wait for ideal conditions. We build with what we have, or we die. That lesson shaped me more than any training ever could. A murmur spread through the assembly, a chorus of tones, clicks, and vibrations as the councillors processed his words. Some sounded approving, others distressed. Elias stood unmoving, his silence deliberate, his refusal to shrink back part of the statement. Then Eric's voice cut through the hole, measured yet edged. The demonstration proves what I suspected. Humanity does not fight with strength alone. They fight with context, with invention. They will not always wield the sharpest blade, but they will always find one when none is offered. Councillor Thalen's gaze narrowed. That makes them useful. It also makes them dangerous. The crystalline delegate inclined his head. The League thrives on balance. To admit a species whose strength lies in unpredictability may unsettle that balance. Eric's wings flexed, though his tone remained composed. Balance is not maintained by stasis. It is maintained by adaptation. Humanity's presence will force us to grow, as much as it forces them to be measured. Elias said nothing, though his pulse roared in his ears. He was not sure whether Eric's defense protected him or exposed him further. What he knew, with startling clarity, was that every word spoken here would shape the way his people were seen for generations. The deliberations dragged on, shifting between languages and tones Elias could not decipher, though the mood remained tense. Delegates debated not the mechanics of his weapon, but the philosophy it represented, a species that could not be cornered, one that found ways to resist even in scarcity. To some, this was proof of potential. To others, it was evidence of threat. Finally, silence reclaimed the chamber. The presiding councillor, a towering figure whose translucent form pulsed faintly within a light, addressed Elias directly. Human, you have shown us something we did not expect. Whether this is a gift or a curse remains uncertain. You and your people will be watched closely. The words struck like a gavel, final yet unresolved. Elias inclined his head in acknowledgement. Then watch. Judge us by what we do, not what you fear. A hush followed, deeper than before. The councillor did not respond, and Elias did not push further. He had said enough, perhaps too much. Yet within his chest, he felt a spark of defiance, quiet but unyielding. As the assembly dispersed, Eric's approached him, mandibles twitching in an unreadable gesture. You stood well, the instructor said softly. Better than most expected. Elias exhaled slowly, tension draining from his frame. And what do you expect now? Eric's eyes gleamed, reflecting faint light. That the galaxy has just seen the first shadow of what humanity will become. And shadows, he added, wings folding tightly, can either herald dawn or warn of storms. Elias walked beside him out of the chamber, his weapon still in hand, though heavier now with the weight of meaning. He did not know whether he had secured humanity's place in the stars or painted a target on their backs. All he knew was that the conflict was no longer about a single bow or a single cadet. It was about a species standing at the threshold of galactic judgment. And though uncertainty pressed in on every side, Elias felt the smallest flicker of resolve ignite within him. Humanity had been seen. Whatever storm came next, they would not meet it unarmed.